Okay, welcome everyone to the Virtual Cooking Club this month. Thanks for joining us. We are going to talk about a good brunch frittata recipe today, as well as a few topics about the cattle industry. So I'm your host today. My name is Taylor Young. I'm the Director of Consumer Affairs for the Missouri Beef Industry Council. And in this role, I serve as a liaison between the beef industry and professional organizations that interact with consumers. So I help get the message of the beef industry out to people who would be buying beef, who may have questions. I also work with the retail sector, dietitians, physicians, and other health and wellness professionals to help them understand not just the beef industry itself, but also the different health aspects that incorporating beef into your diet can add. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat along the way or raise your hand and we'll try to get those answered as soon as possible. So thanks again for joining us. I'm going to start by talking just a little bit about the beef industry and kind of what cattle eat. So the majority of cattle spend the majority of their lives on pasture, eating a grass diet. And you hear a lot of grain-fed, grass-fed, different terms like that about the cattle industry, but it's important to realize that almost 90% of any cattle's lifetime is spent eating grass or forages of some sort. So all grain finished and some grass finished cattle spend their last months in a feed yard. So you see pictures of cattle in a feed yard. That's predominantly when the grain finished cattle are fed the grain in the feed yard, and then also sometimes grass finished animals are taken to a feed yard as well and fed hay or other type of forage diets as well. Or some of the grass finished animals are also finished in a pasture. So they stay out in the pasture for their entire lifetime. So here's kind of a typical life cycle of cattle in the US. You can see there's kind of three main periods in cattle's lives. Cow-calf is when the early part of their life period. They're spent mostly eating grass, and this period lasts about 6 to 9 months. That's right after they're born. They stay with their mothers for a little while, and then they are turned out onto pasture to eat grass as well. And then when they move into the next period of their lifetime, the stocker or backgrounder operation, that's when the animals are mainly focusing on gaining that weight and growing quickly to get up to a bigger weight. This is when the animals grow mostly, and on this period of their life, they're also mostly eating grass and other human inedible plants. There's also some legumes that they may eat, just depending on the operations diet, but mostly these animals are still out in the pasture, and this lasts 2 to 6 months in their lifetime. And so the finishing period of their lifetime, that is going to be where some differences occurred. So you hear grass finished or grain finished. And so it's important to know that when finishing an animal with grain, that typically takes 4 to 6 months. And that's the last period in their life stages. That can be in a feed yard. That's predominantly where grain finished animals are finished at, and this lasts for approximately 4 to 6 months. Now, if the producer is going more of a grass finished route, they can either, like I said before, that can occur in a feed yard as well, feeding them hay or other hays and different things that way, or the animal can remain in the pasture during that time. And it's important to note here that when grass finishing an animal, it takes longer. That finishing period will last 6 to 10 months as opposed to the quicker 4 to 6 months when finishing with grain. That's because it's a little bit slower for the animals to get up to their finishing weight. They grow just a little bit slower on that grass-fed diet. So you can see here that the length, the cattle life cycle in terms of age is going to vary depending on different finishing styles. So a lot of people have a lot of questions, and something that we hear a lot is grass finished more sustainable? And the short answer is yes and no. So grain finished animals they're going to have a lower carbon footprint since the cattle reach their finishing weight at a younger age. As I just mentioned, that finishing stage goes a little bit quicker on the grain finished diet. However, grass finished cattle, they can contribute more to sustainability by using the forage from grasslands to sequester carbon. So they're out there in the pastures. A great thing that having cattle out in the pastures does is by grazing, they're able to return a lot of the nutrients into the soil and do a lot of sequestering carbon that way. So really, whether it's grain-fed cattle or grass-finished cattle, a lot of beef producers in the US do a great job at being sustainable in their practices, and both have a great answer for, are they sustainable? Yes. So now we're going to dive into a little bit about the different labeling terms you might see on some beef at the grocery store. It's important to know when you see terms like grain finished, grass finished, certified organic, and naturally raised, what do those mean so that you as a consumer can be informed and use those to make a decision when purchasing beef. So as I mentioned before, grain finished, they still spend the majority of their lives eating grass or forage. Remember that nearly 90% of their life is still spent eating forage. Grain finished is going to be the most common finishing method for cattle. So you won't necessarily see this on the label all the time, but this is how the majority of cattle in the US are finished. As we mentioned previously, they spend the last 4 to 6 months of their lives at the feed yard eating a balanced diet. It's usually grains or other feed ingredients like potato hulls, sugar beets, and they can eat hay and forage as well. So when animals are grain finished, it's important to note that they may or they may not be given US Food and Drug Administration approved antibiotics to treat, prevent, or control diseases or growth promoting hormones. So there might not necessarily be just getting grain finished. That doesn't mean that they weren't given antibiotics throughout their lifetime or any growth hormones. So then we'll jump into the grass finished or grass fed. You can hear it both ways, but it means the same thing. These animals spend their whole lives eating grass or forages. They, as mentioned, they may also spend the last few months of their lives at a feed yard eating grass, forage, hay, or silage as well. And again, it's important to note that just because it says grass finished, that doesn't mean that they have or have not been given antibiotics or any growth promoting hormones. That's strictly, the grass finished or grass fed is strictly talking about the diets that they're eating throughout their lifetime. So certified organic. When you see certified organic on the label, that means that they have never received any antibiotics or growth promoting hormones. They can either be grain finished or grass finished as long as they're eating feed that is 100% organically grown. And so yes, they may spend time at a feed yard and it may or may not tell you on the label as well whether this is a grain finished animal or a grass finished animal. And then the last label we'll talk about is naturally raised, which may also be referred to as never ever. This means that they have never received any antibiotics or growth promoting hormones. Again, they may be either grain finished or grass finished, and they may spend time at a feed yard as well. So now we'll talk just a little bit about sustainability in the beef industry. Something that I love to talk about is how sustainable, the cattle producers in the US are. Compared to other cattle producing countries, US beef has one of the lowest carbon footprints in the world, coming in at 10 to 50 times lower than some other nations. And a thing we hear a lot about is greenhouse gas emissions from cattle. And in the US, the greenhouse gas emissions from cattle only account for 2% of the whole US greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a fun fact to throw out there. People talk a lot about the greenhouse gases, and we in the beef industry can claim that the beef cattle only account for 2% of all the greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And also, US farmers and ranchers are able to produce 18% of the whole world's beef using only 8% of the world's cattle. So with using the very sustainable methods with improved efficiency, we're able to produce 18% of the beef in the entire world with substantially less cattle. So now I'm going to show a video. The Beef It's What's for Dinner, they put together these awesome videos that show a chef from a restaurant getting to go and visit a cattle farmer. And so it's a neat interaction. They talk about beef dishes that they prepare in their kitchens, and then also get to visit with the beef producer to gain a better understanding of where that comes from before it gets to their restaurant. And the producer gets to learn, where does the beef go after it leaves my farm? And what are the great creative ways that these chefs are preparing the beef for people?
My name is Victor Jimenez. I am the executive chef and partner at Cowboy Star Restaurant Butcher Shop. I'm here with my chefs Ray Walters and Nicholas Ryder.
My name is Steve Wooten. I am the president of Beatty Canyon Ranch. We're located in southeast Colorado. Beatty Canyon is a cow-calf operation of 27,000 acres of native vegetation that our cattle graze across. We're a multi-generational family operation. I and my wife Joy are the fourth generation, and we're fortunate to have the fifth and sixth generation working on the ranch with us.
What surprised me the most going into the ranch was the care that is given to land management and the sustainability and efforts that they're putting to continue with the existence of the ranch. 40-ounce porterhouse that we have featured, it's been in our menu since day one. It's a great cut of beef. I believe that it covers a lot of the guests' expectations when they're undecided about what to order. You get a little bit of the filet, you get a little bit of New York, and seeing our guests sharing steaks these days is just wonderful. We try to minimize the amount of what we do to our steaks because we would like to have the product speak for itself. So light seasoning, salt, pepper, and that's pretty much it. What we do is simple grill, and we just let the product that we bring in to shine.
In southeast Colorado, the area is a semi-arid region. It's not really suited to crop production or farming, so the best use of this land is to graze cattle on it. It also supports an abundance of wildlife. We can take advantage of what's out there in our natural resources. We can graze all year round on grasses. We do not have to bring in a lot of processed feeds and feed our cattle. By doing that, we can utilize winter grazing areas that have a different type of species makeup, or we can go to summer country type area that has a different type of grass species makeup. It gives us a lot of flexibility to work against wintertime situations. It's a unique environment that we're blessed to be operating in. I was excited to meet the team, Cowboy Star, because I had a chance to get some feedback from folks at the retail side of the supply chain, to give me some information that I could incorporate into what we decided to do. I was really impressed with about the care and attention they paid to putting really nutritious beef on the table at their restaurant.
It was great to meet Steve and his family, and I cannot wait to have him join us for dinner at our restaurant. Beef is what's for dinner.
I think those are such fun videos, getting to see the interaction between the cattle producer and then the chefs. It kind of brings the whole story to completion, from raising the cattle to putting it on the table in front of you. So if you want to see more of those videos, Beef It's What's for Dinner has quite a few of them out there. They're called Chef's Roll videos, and you can find them at beefitswhatsfordinner.com. So now we will jump into the cooking portion of today's program. So this month we are featuring a beef and veggie frittata. I thought this one would go great around the holidays, going into the Christmas and New Year's and holiday season. I know personally for my family around the holidays, we like to do brunch. We can kind of sleep in and then I'll get everyone together and have a nice a brunch meal at some point. So Beef It's What's for Dinner has a lot of great breakfast and brunch recipes out there. And the one that we chose to feature this month is a beef and veggie frittata. So you can see here, it's a pretty simple ingredient list. You have your ground beef, potatoes, put in some onion and zucchini for those vegetables, and then eggs, fresh basil, cheese, and then a chopped tomato to finish it off. Here you can see the nutrition profile for this recipe. This is using 93% lean ground beef. You can see the 335 calories, the saturated fat, protein, iron, and zinc in this recipe. And all the recipes from beefthat'swhatsfordinner.com, they show this nutritional profile on the recipe, which I think is super helpful and super fun to just kind of look at, what does this recipe incorporate? And that always makes us feel good to see how nutritious a recipe is going to be. All right, so here is the cooking demonstration.
All right, guys, we're gonna jump into our recipe now. This beef and veggie frittata is an awesome addition to any holiday brunch that you might be having, or just any time you want a quick, simple recipe to cook for your family or friends. It is loaded with ground beef, diced red potatoes, zucchini, eggs, fresh basil, and then some Italian cheese. So the first thing we're gonna do is go ahead and preheat our oven to 350 degrees. All right, once you get that started, we are going to add our potatoes to our pan and our water. And we're gonna go ahead and kind of get this going and simmering to get these potatoes cooked a little bit before we add them into the recipe. While the potatoes are simmering, I'm gonna go ahead and cut up the zucchini, onion, and basil. Simmering the potatoes first just gets them kind of soft, so that way when we add them into the frittata, they are already cooked. Okay, the potatoes are nice and soft, so we're going to remove them from the water and set them aside while we get the ground beef going. Okay, we'll add in our ground beef. Get that broken up so that it'll get to cooking well. This recipe calls for lean ground beef, so what we're using today is 93% lean, 7% fat. All right, now that we have browned the ground beef, we will add in the onions and zucchini and get those cooking a little bit. We'll just let these cook for just a couple minutes so that they can get soft and mixed in with the ground beef. And while we're doing that, I will whisk up the eggs and get them ready to add in. Our vegetables are getting soft, our zucchini and onion, so we're going to go ahead and add back in our potatoes. Add those back in from earlier. And then we're also going to add in some salt and pepper. Get some seasoning in there. Now some pepper. All right. We'll stir in our potatoes and seasoning, get that mixed up. Give that a minute to all come together. All right, we're going to go ahead and add in our eggs that we whisked up earlier. We're going to pour them evenly across the ground beef and vegetables here. and then we'll pour in our chopped basil as well and get that stirred in. Stir it all together to get it setting. And then even everything out. All right, and once we have a nice even layer, the frittata is starting to come together, we're going to sprinkle the cheese across the top and then pop this into the oven. Our oven is preheated to 350 degrees, and we will pop it in and cook for about 18 to 20 minutes or until the eggs are cooked through. Stick this in. All right, we'll set our timer. Our frittata has come out of the oven, the eggs are cooked through, and the cheese is nice and melty across the top. The last step is to cut it into wedges. This recipe provides 6 servings for your family or friends, and if you want, you can sprinkle diced tomatoes across the top to finish it up. So thank you all for joining us for this recipe today.
So again, a big thank you to Coleman Appliance in Jeff City for letting us use their test kitchen to shoot the videos. They have such a beautiful space there. We really appreciate them letting us come use it. Also, thank you everyone for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed our brunch recipe and the facts today. And that you have a wonderful holiday season. Feel free to ask any questions that you have now, or thanks for coming.